The world is changing, and Russia's message is clear. It's back in Africa. Old empires die and new powers are born.
I hope you heard that. The world is changing and Russia's message is clear. Old empires are dying and new ones are born. Hello guys, welcome once again to Think Tank TV. Now, it's actually no news that South Africa just hosted over 50 world leaders for the BRICS summit that was just rounded off. And guess what? I had to go do some research about the BRICS summit and I found out some details I'd love to share with you. Strategies Putin is actually using to become the next world power. And guess what? If you do not read between the lines, you may never understand the strategies. We all know that most of these African countries and some of the underdeveloping world have actually gone ahead to lament the imperialism, the colonization, environmental degradation, and all that they are suffering from most of their colonial masters. Guess what? This is exactly the lacuna Putin has used to invade most of these African countries to gain their support. In this video, I'll be unveiling to you what you need to know about the BRICS summit, and I'm going to be unveiling to you the strategies he has actually used to invade and take charge of most of these African countries. Please don't go anywhere, because I'd like to give you full details about what the BRICS summit is about, what you need to know about the BRICS summit, the countries that makes up the BRICS summit, and the extent they have gone in terms of taking over the world power. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back to give you some details about the strategies Putin is actually using to become the next world power. But please do well to go to the comment section and drop your comment. Let's get to know what your thought is about this video. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back to wrap up the video. My name is Moses and this is Think Tank TV.
So first things first, what is BRICS and how did it come into being? It's an interesting story, also ironical. This is a group that was meant to counter the West, but its origin is linked to the same West. In 2001, Jim O'Neill was an economist at the Goldman Sachs. He made an observation about the developing world. He pointed out how high the growth rates were in Brazil, Russia, India, and China. He called them the emerging stars, the nations that would rule the globalized economy of the 21st century. He coined an acronym, BRIC, B-R-I-C, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And what did these countries do? They took the name and ran with it. They pitched the idea of cooperation, sort of like the G7, but for the global south. So the name was coined, and these countries began talking. But the real push came during the global financial crisis of 2008. The markets collapsed. There was panic across the globe. But in the global south, there was growing wariness. Countries started questioning the US-led financial system. They were doubting its credibility. In 2009, the BRIC leaders met for the very first time. 2 years later, South Africa joined, and the group came to be known as BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. B-R-I-C-S. Next question. How important is the BRICS? This bloc straddles 1/4 of the world. It accounts for more than 40% of the global population. That's over 3 billion people. Their combined GDP is more than $23 trillion. It accounts for 26% of the global economy, and it is this economy that was at the heart of BRICS when it started. They wanted to take on the US-led financial system. And for that, the BRICS did two things. One, they rallied for reforms, both at the World Bank and the IMF, that's the International Monetary Fund. They asked for reforms here. And then they set up their own institutions, like the new Development Bank. It opened in 2017, and since then, it has funded multiple projects in these countries. But the way it functions is very different from the IMF. You see, the IMF sets conditions for loans. Their motto is quite simple: make changes in your country, and then we will lend you money. But the new Development Bank has none of that. It wasn't imposing like the IMF. It also allowed the use of national currencies, which brings us to another proposal, a BRICS currency, one that can take on the US dollar. It's been a topic of discussion for quite some time now. The idea was mooted by Brazil last year. But this year in South Africa, it is off the table. Why? Because the BRICS still functions in a world where dollar is the king. 60% of global currency reserves are held in the US dollar. 88% of international transactions use the dollar. The greenback may have seen some decline, but it won't be replaced by the BRICS currency, not anytime soon. Also, while the idea of a BRICS currency may be noble, it lacks political traction. And that's because there are cracks in the bloc. So how divided is the BRICS? All members essentially agree on one thing: challenging Western financial hegemony. There's agreement on that. But when it comes to all other issues, there is a serious lack of consensus. The bloc is made up of 5 nations. All of them have different interests and priorities, often clashing interests. They don't align with each other. You see, the BRICS is an informal alliance. Every country shares the platform. Every country has a veto power.
Wow.
But in most cases, national interest trumps the shared agenda. Take, for instance, India and China. They're locked in a border standoff. In 2020, there were clashes in Galwan. Ties have been strained. Their leaders keep meeting at BRICS summits, but they do not find common ground. Then there is the war in Ukraine. Russia is pitted against the West. China is backing Russia. But India refuses to take this anti-Western stand. India believes in bridging divides and balancing ties. It does not want to be boxed in any camp or alliance. India has historical ties with Russia and a growing partnership with America. It wants to preserve both. So the BRICS is divided. They also can't seem to agree on the way forward. China wants to expand the BRICS. Russia and South Africa agree, but India and Brazil do not. At least 40 countries want to join this group, 40. The list includes countries like Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and Egypt. China wants them to join to form a group that takes on the US. Now, China and the US are engaged in a trade war. They have an axe to grind. Russia and the US are fighting a proxy war. With more members in the BRICS, Moscow wants to win more partners globally. And South Africa is also on the same page. They also want more members. But Brazil is resisting expansion. It fears that its stature will be diluted. And India is on the fence. New Delhi thinks that expanding the BRICS will strengthen Beijing's influence. It does not want the BRICS to become a China bloc. So again, no consensus. What does this mean for the future of BRICS? Is the bloc still relevant? Or does it lack identity? In 2001, these nations were seen as drivers of the global economy, but 22 years later, the scenario is very different. Yes, the bloc has created an alternative to the IMF and the World Bank, but the new development bank is in no way close to them. In the last decade, it approved loans worth $33 billion. That's 1/3 of what the World Bank committed to giving in just 1 year. And beyond that, there is little to show. So are the glory days of BRICS over? Its members have internal challenges, and these challenges are bigger than their common agenda. Russia is fighting a war, diplomatically isolated by the West and hit by sanctions. China's economy is suffering. There's deflation, there's growing unemployment, the property market is slumping and companies are leaving China. Brazil's economy too is contracting. There is rising poverty and inequality. As for South Africa, its unemployment crisis is a ticking time bomb. Millions are jobless, which leaves us with India, the only growth story here. One of the few bright spots in the gloomy global economy, also not without its own set of challenges. So where does it leave India? Should it stay or leave the bloc? In the 2000s, BRICS was an outcome of optimism and hope. But today it seems to lack purpose. Yes, the BRICS leaders still meet every year, but the bloc needs to do more. One, it needs to find a way to overcome its political differences. It needs a more unified approach. Easier said than done, of course. 2, no country should be allowed to hijack the platform. And 3, the agenda needs to expand. It needs to go beyond economic diplomacy. So should India invest its time and effort here? The answer is yes. The thing with diplomacy and politics is that it's usually better to be in the room than out of it.
I hope you can see that these are just the impediments they have faced in becoming the next world power. Now, just imagine how far they have gone in reducing the impact of the dollar. They have gone ahead to open a contingency reserve treasury. They've opened a new development bank which is going to be contending with the likes of IMF and the World Bank. And interestingly, 25% of the world population, by virtue of their members, is actually part of the BRICS. Not just that, they have 16% of the world GDP. They have 11 countries that have actually indicated interest in joining the bloc, and all of which are exporters of oil and gas and other metals. If you can read between the lines, I believe the message is very clear. For Russia, 21st century, Africa is the place to be. Please do well to hit the comment section and let's get to know what your thought is about these current happenings in the world politics today. Do well to also hit the like button as a means of courtesy to the producers of this content. If you're new to our session, please do well to smash the subscribe button so that you can also be notified when we put up informative content like this. Thank you so much to all our viewers and returning subscribers. We do not take it lightly. My name again is Moses and this is Think Tank TV. Bye for now.